We talk about losing Keith Moon in 1978 and the reaction from 10 years after drummer Ric Lee. Was he surprised? I'm John Beaudin from Rock History Music. The brand new 10 Years After album is called A Sting in the Tail. It's going to be released on March 19th. I've had a chance to listen to it. There is not a bad track off it. If you're a fan of the band or a fan of the classic rock sound, there are some groups that don't have it anymore. 10 years after? Man, I know Alvin Lee is long past, but I highly recommend this album. And in this series, we'll be talking about specific songs, and we'll also have a feature on it on March 19th on our sister site, Rock History Book. Were you surprised? Like, for instance, there are people when they die, when Keith Moon died, I was talking to one of the photographers who was with them, not during that time, but before, and he had, experienced the antics of Keith Moon. And I said, come on, you must admit. He said, no, a lot of people weren't surprised. And leading up to that Paul McCartney escapade before he died and that party. But were you surprised when Keith Moon passed away?
I was very sad because I knew Keith. I was an acquaintance of Keith. So I think that's the best way to describe it. We weren't friends as such.
But he knew who you were.
Huh?
But he knew who you were. And...
Oh, no, he came to my house in Bedfordshire. They did a gig in Dunstable, and I went to the gig, and I invited him back afterwards, and he came back for a drink. He had a driver because he always used to drink too much, so he couldn't drive, I think he had the pink Rolls Royce at the time. And he was that, my first wife reminded me that night was the most erudite that he was, because he was talking to, it was when there was the whole thing with apartheid in South Africa. And he was talking about that and being very, as I say, erudite about it. I didn't actually remember that. We sat in the kitchen, we had a few drinks, and I don't think he was drinking very much that night, And he was very, very down to earth, Keith. And I liked him a lot. I spent time with him. As far as I understand it, I saw him in the Speakeasy one night, which was a drinking club in London where a lot of us used to go after the gigs. And he said, we're buying Shepperton Studios. I said, oh, really? Yeah. Got to make films, dear boy. Got to make films. And I think Keith was the prime motivator behind that. And they did subsequently buy Shepperton, and ran it for quite a good while and put some breath back into the film business. And also, of course, a lot of the sound stages were rented by bands that were the big bands, were getting ready to go out on the road and needed to rehearse a big show, with sets and everything. Yeah. But I think he was a prime mover in that. But he was, the other thing I always said about Keith as well is you couldn't stand too close to him because you could get killed in the nicest possible way.
Oh, that's a good quote.
Going back to what you asked me earlier, which I didn't quite finish, is I was very sad to hear what happened to Keith, but at the same time, I have to say I don't think I was surprised because of the way he lived his life, Yeah. And I talked to John, I've forgotten his surname, John Entwistle, the bass player, yeah. And he said, in a way, it was good that Keith went when he did. He said, because we were getting rid of him. And I said, why was that? And he said, because he would just become so unreliable. So he said, they said to him, look, you weren't at rehearsals today. You should have been there, but you were in LA, and he knew he should have been at rehearsals. He didn't make it. So the next day, they said, we're meeting next week on Tuesday, and we'll set, so the next week they met and Keith was there. Everything's all set up. And they said, well, here I am. I'm ready to go. Yeah. And they said, well, that's good, but it's Wednesday today. Yesterday was Tuesday. So there was all of that going on.
Well, you came from the Jazzers, though, anyway, right? Those were your influence.
Yeah. Well, we all did. I mean, I learned a lot from Alvin and Leo when I first joined the band because they were doing Ray Charles numbers. They did Bo Diddley, and that was a 10-minute guitar solo for Alvin, even in those days. Bizarrely, they did a Petula Clark number, Ya Ya. Go bummer, ya ya, go da 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 ba 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 da da. Yeah. And I think some of those things had come from when they played in Hamburg, when they had to play 5 45-minute sets a night. You know, they did basically like 5 hours with a quarter of an hour break in between each song, in between each set. And they'd done that in Hamburg. I never did any of that. So they used to learn to sort of jam those things and keep them going, just so they did less numbers in the set.
Let's just say you're in the doctor's office and you're sitting there and you've got a guy beside you and you're making conversation. He looks up at you and he says, well, what's your name, Rick? And what do you do for your living? You've lived such a life that's a dream to a lot of people, but to you, you must be just little old you. I mean, it's just you're with yourself all day. What do you say to someone? Say, hey, so Rick, what do you do for a living? Like, what do you say?
I'm a professional drummer.
And then he says, oh, what have you done? I mean, you've gone to Woodstock. You were in a pretty big band.
I never used to say it one time. I just used to, kind of pretend I was just one of the boys that played locally and whatever. And then of late, I don't know why, but people say, well, did you play with anybody that we would know? And I said, well, probably not, but it's a band called 10 Years After. And they go, oh, yes. And they look at you blankly, because we didn't ever really have hit records as such, certainly not over here. And I would say we played at the Woodstock Festival in 1969. And then there's a sort of a penny starts to drop, and they go, oh, God. Oh, yes, I remember that. Oh, that was huge, and then it'll be like, oh, so did you? And then there's all the questions,
Yeah.
Now what I say is I shall read the book.
A Sting in the Tail is the name of the brand new 10 Years After album. It'll be released on March 19th. And Ric Lee has a brand new book called Headstocks to Woodstock. There'll be links in the description of this video. Make sure you comment on our video, subscribe to our channel, and share our video. We'll have more from Ric Lee in a few days. I'm John Beaudin from Rock History Music.